Hi, I'm Tom Sokolowski of Wisdom Nutrition. Should you be eating organic food, or is it a fad? How harmful are the pesticides found in conventionally grown foods? And is the most commonly used weed killer in the UK that you or one of your neighbours are likely to be using really safe, just because it's not restricted in any way? In this video I discuss the evidence and end with a few tips to protect your health. This is the fourth of 6 videos on detoxification, which are part of my series 10 Steps to Reduce Inflammation. You will be familiar with antibiotic resistance from overuse of antibiotics, but pesticides in the environment can also confer antimicrobial resistance, and it's now a subject of study as to whether the resulting antibiotic resistant genes can then impact human health. If this idea is now being taken seriously, you might wonder if pesticides we ingest could be contributing to antimicrobial resistance in our intestines. We know, for example, that mercury is antimicrobial, which might not surprise you, but when monkeys were given mercury amalgam dental fillings, the resulting mercury-resistant oral streptococci bacteria were also resistant to some antibiotics, and they could transfer this antibiotic resistance to other bacteria in a laboratory setting. In any case, let's examine some more solid evidence that pesticides and herbicides could have a negative impact on human health. I'll be focusing on organophosphates and glyphosate, which together cover the more common pesticides and herbicides you will be exposed to. Organophosphates are used in pesticides, herbicides, and in manufacturing plastics and solvents, and have also been used as nerve gases since World War I. They inhibit an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter, that is a molecule that is used to pass a signal from one neuron, usually to another neuron. In the case of acetylcholine, however, it can also be a signal from a neuron to a muscle fibre to cause the muscle to contract. Organophosphates can therefore cause an accumulation of acetylcholine around the nerve endings that receive the signals, and this results in overstimulation. This is the mechanism of organophosphate toxicity to both insects and humans alike. Exposure can be through inhalation, direct contact, and ingestion, and both acute and chronic exposure can cause a whole array of symptoms affecting the nervous, respiratory, and cardiovascular systems, as well as impacting your gut and kidneys. Elevated blood sugar, flu-like symptoms, malaise, weakness, memory loss, speech impairment, and lack of coordination are just a few of the potential symptoms of chronic organophosphate exposure. Organophosphates may play a role in driving inflammation and inflammatory diseases, and there is some evidence that organophosphate exposure may be linked with diabetes, weight gain, high blood pressure, and kidney disease. Some commonly used organophosphate pesticides inhibit enzymes that metabolize estrogen into a safer estrogen metabolite, and one of these pesticides does so irreversibly. This could potentially lead to more estrogen being metabolized by different enzymes that form more toxic and more inflammatory estrogen metabolites that can damage DNA. The ratio of one of these more harmful estrogen metabolites to the safer estrogen metabolite, as measured in the urine, may be in fact a useful marker of breast cancer risk. Levels of one particular organophosphate residue in urine have been linked with ADHD in a dose-responsive manner, and the association holds at normal levels of exposure in US children. If organophosphate exposure does actually cause ADHD, a likely mechanism has been elucidated, since acetylcholine is involved in regulating neurons that use dopamine as a neurotransmitter, dopamine being a neurotransmitter that supports motivation and focus. Organophosphate pesticide exposure has also been linked with Parkinson's disease, with some evidence supporting a causal mechanism in which the pesticide inhibits an enzyme that metabolizes dopal. Dopal is a natural downstream metabolite of dopamine, which plays a key role in both ADHD and Parkinson's disease. But if not sufficiently metabolized, dopal is toxic to dopamine signaling neurons. Some organophosphates have been shown to poison the energy-generating mitochondria and cause inflammation in the cells lining the gut, and the resulting gut dysfunction may also play a role in Parkinson's disease development. Some pesticides, both organophosphates and other compounds, can interfere with sex hormone signalling, and they do so by binding to hormone receptors and have been linked with lower testosterone levels and even delayed gonad development in adolescent males. Now let's turn to glyphosate. Glyphosate is the most common herbicide used in the UK and is the most heavily used herbicide globally, both in residential and agricultural settings. It's sold by Monsanto under the trade name Roundup, which is also mixed with other undisclosed compounds. Roundup Ready crops are genetically modified to be resistant to glyphosate, so that Roundup can be used to control weeds without killing the crop. It may not be killed, but if sprayed with glyphosate you might, after watching the rest of this video, consider the crop as damaged for human consumption. The Roundup Ready crops are the ones that produce sterile terminator seeds that you're probably familiar with, and this means that farmers are dependent on Monsanto for more seed every year. You will have heard about the decline in insect populations, including the bees that are needed to pollinate the crops we depend on. A 2022 study found that glyphosate exposure at normal environmental levels impairs the ability of bees to regulate the temperature of their nest, and may thus be a causative factor in the dwindling of bee populations that could eventually threaten our food supply. I imagine that for some sensitive beings, what I have just described could be enough to make you recoil from the use of Roundup in your garden. But this being a scientific educational channel concerned with measurable effects on human health, you may on the other hand be expecting me to provide more evidence for Roundup's health effects. Here I will just pick out some of the evidence for glyphosate being harmful to health, rather than focusing on picking apart the data, conclusions and the funding of any of the deniers that are out there. It has been claimed that glyphosate targets one specific pathway, the Shikimati pathway, that occurs in plants and microorganisms but not in humans, and therefore does not harm humans. However, it's now well established that the gut microbiome plays a key role in human health. In animal studies, pathogenic microbes have been found to have a high degree of resistance to glyphosate. Beneficial gut flora that would normally keep the pathogens in check, however, are sensitive to the effects of glyphosate. This effect of glyphosate in killing off beneficial gut flora and sparing pathogens could explain the increase in Clostridium botulinum infection in cattle since the turn of the century. Glyphosate has been found to inhibit testosterone production in mice at a low dose by damaging the mitochondria that are vital to testosterone synthesis. This effect appears to be independent of the damaging effects of glyphosate on the gut microbiome, thus demonstrating another fallacy of the argument that glyphosate is harmless to humans because its more advertised toxic effect is on microbes and weeds. Should anyone ever tell you that a chemical is safe because it acts or does not act on one known pathway, you can ask them if they have tested the chemical on every other pathway in the human body, of which there are thousands. My personal opinion is that this demonstrates why it is deeply misguided to criticise the precautionary principle as unscientific, at least when applied to systems as complex as biological systems are. I discussed the precautionary principle in my video on plastic toxicity, to which you can find the link in the YouTube description for this video. A 2015 study examined the effects of a low environmentally relevant dose of glyphosate-based herbicide on rats and concluded that, and I quote, "Chronic exposure at an ultra-low environmental dose can result in liver and kidney damage with potential significant health implications for animal and human populations." Growing evidence indicates that glyphosate may also play a role in birth defects, liver and kidney damage, tumour formation and endocrine disruption, with some of these effects detected at levels that are lower than the regulatory acceptable levels. Furthermore, adjuvants in commercial herbicide formulations such as Roundup enhance the toxicity of glyphosate. Glyphosate is also neurotoxic to humans at levels lower than the acceptable limits set by regulatory agencies. It affects the development of the nervous system and can cause oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and hence neuronal cell death and behavioural and motor disorders. In the next video, in which I discuss how to improve detoxification with nutrition, you will learn about the enzymes that actually detoxify chemicals in your body. Glyphosate inhibits many of these enzymes, which therefore increases the toxicity of other contaminants, and this further drives inflammation in a toxic, what is known as a cocktail effect. A cocktail effect meaning that a mix of toxins is more toxic than the sum of its parts. It has been proposed that glyphosate may be the main driver of the recent rise in gluten intolerance and the celiac disease epidemic, since celiac disease and glyphosate toxicity have some very similar effects. These effects of both glyphosate exposure and celiac disease include a reduction in certain amino acids and neurotransmitters, mineral deficiencies, impaired detoxification, and an increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The reproductive issues linked with celiac disease could be a result of glyphosate exposure, and these include infertility, miscarriages, and birth defects. Glyphosate has been labelled as probably carcinogenic by the International Agency for Research on Cancer back in 2015. In a 2018 multi-million-dollar lawsuit, a groundkeeper was awarded damages by Monsanto after being exposed to Roundup on a long-term basis and developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Whether or not toxic effects could be due to the glyphosate or to additives that may potentially be more toxic than glyphosate itself, the case was successfully made that Monsanto had failed to warn consumers of the cancer risks of using their product. You can find out more about the evidence for the environmental and human health impacts of glyphosate-based herbicides by reading some of the documents provided by Pesticide Action Network UK, for which I've provided a link. We can make choices to limit our exposure to pesticides and herbicides which could be having a big impact on our attempts to detox and to reduce inflammation. To minimise exposure to pesticides and herbicides, eat organic food for a start as much as possible, drink clean water, which I covered in my previous video, choose natural products for your garden, and non-toxic methods of pest control in your home as much as possible, and also spend as little time on or around golf courses where that pristine weed-free perfection may come at an unexpected cost. If possible, don't spend too much time around crop fields where pesticides are used. In particular, avoid conventionally grown grains, seeds and pulses that are likely to be contaminated with glyphosate that is sprayed on these crops to kill off surrounding plants for an easier harvest. GMO crops such as soy, corn, alfalfa, canola, cotton, sugar beets and sorghum have been developed to be resistant to glyphosate, and so are likely to be some of the crops most contaminated with this toxin. GMOs are also used in feed for conventionally grown animals. This contamination of food with pesticides and herbicides may be part of a reason why increased frequency of organic food consumption has been linked with a reduced risk of cancer, and cutting costs by choosing conventional foods may turn out to be a false economy. If you can only afford to eat some organic food, prioritise animal produce such as meat, eggs and dairy produce, since toxins tend to accumulate higher up the food chain and are often stored in body fat. Also prioritise organically grown grains, beans and pulses, and in particular the glyphosate-resistant crops I listed a few moments ago. The Environmental Working Group releases an annual shopper's guide to pesticides, which lists the safest and most contaminated fruits and vegetables, the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, respectively, though this is based on US data. To find out more about pesticide use in UK produce and also about the cocktail effect, see the Pesticide Action Network UK, who also provide information on glyphosate. For any fruit or vegetables that are not organically grown, washing your produce in a solution of baking soda can help remove some of the pesticides. A 2017 study took organic gala apples and exposed them to a fungicide and an organophosphate pesticide for 24 hours. It was then found that washing the apples for 15 minutes in a 1% solution of baking soda removed 80% of the fungicide and 96% of the organophosphate pesticide. The fungicide penetrated more deeply into the apple and thus less of it was removed by washing. We need to remember that there are many other herbicides, fungicides and pesticides in use in conventional farming methods, some of which could penetrate the produce more than others. These toxins are likely to have been applied to your produce for much longer than 24 hours before they reach your kitchen, and perhaps that could lead to further penetration of the produce. Furthermore, some produce is likely to more readily absorb a given toxin than others. Despite these limitations, the study does indicate that using baking soda solution is likely to be more effective than washing your produce in plain water. You can also improve organophosphate detoxification by supporting a key enzyme that helps to break down organophosphates, as explained in the next video in this series, and genetics play a role in the functioning and levels of this enzyme. It's important to bear in mind that to detoxify and to reduce inflammation is not a sprint. You need to approach this with Lao Tzu's words in your mind, which are, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." This series of videos on detoxification is rich in detail and is part of a longer series on inflammation, which is also rich in detail. Perhaps that's just what you wanted, but you may also find this information causes you anxiety, fear or overwhelm. So how can you use this information to empower yourself to take action to improve your health without feeling overwhelmed? I suggest you implement 1, 2 or maybe even 3 changes from these videos on detoxification or from the whole wider series of videos on inflammation, and choose the ones that you feel most drawn to and that would be easiest for you to focus on to begin with. Note that I have made few precise suggestions for changes to make in these first 4 videos on detoxification, and this is so that you can set your own goals. Perhaps your target could simply be to stop drinking water from plastic bottles on Sundays when you are at home, if that is what seems achievable for you. Perhaps it would make more sense to find out more about which products contain PFAS, forever chemicals, as discussed in the video on plastics, since currently we do not know how to detoxify these. Don't be so ambitious or hurried as to override your own psychology, as you may be setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. Set yourself realistic goals. This is the way to make lasting change. Make a note in your diary to come back to this series in 30 days' time once the changes you have made have become routine. Now you can set the next few goals for yourself to focus on for the next 30 days. If you slip up, don't be hard on yourself. Kindness to yourself is the best way forward with implementing behavioural change. There are many resources available to encourage this attitude, but you could begin with reading the article on how to change habits with kindness linked to in the description below. The kindness I am referring to is one that includes kindness to your future self, rather than the kindness that seeks instant gratification. This can be framed as kindness allied with mindfulness and can be termed self-compassion. A suitably qualified practitioner can help guide you in testing for many different kinds of toxins and testing to determine the influence of your genetic makeup on detoxification. And this can inform a more targeted dietary and lifestyle approach to deal with specific toxins and weaknesses in your detoxification pathways. Having focused so far on reducing toxic exposure, in the next video I discuss how to actively support detoxification and the nutrients necessary for effective detoxification. Having watched this and hopefully the previous 3 videos, do you feel armed with the knowledge you need to begin to make steps to reduce your exposure to toxins and thus to reduce inflammation? Which of these changes do you feel most drawn to implement? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe, and then click on the notification bell to catch all the videos as they are released. Thank you for watching.